Ah, yes.
Mm-hmm.
With the clap.
Well, hold on. Did you just clap 3 times before you clapped? Do that again.
It's a pre-echo.
Anyway, welcome to episode 80-something of the Carmudgeon Show.
I am Derek Tam-Scott, and this is one Jason Cammisa.
Juan Jason Cammisa? Juan? I'm suddenly Mexican.
Juan Manuel Banjo. No, one. O-N-E, not J-U-A-N.
This might be episode 80-something, but it's actually episode 129.
Yes. Now, for something completely different, we're going to talk about vintage Mercedes-Benzes, specifically the R129, the best SL after the original.
I was going to say this is an absolute high point for Mercedes-Benz, and whether you think you want a 129 or not, you should listen to this because it represents a fascinating arc.
Yes,
about
and it's particularly the historical contextualization of why this car existed when it did and why it is so good.
Anyone who uses the word historical contextualization in a conversation with a friend is probably someone you should listen to.
Anyway, be sure and fire up your Craigslist machine so that you can begin your R129 search. But first, listen to this episode of the Carmudgeon Show, part of the Haggerty Podcast Network.
Welcome to episode 129. Can we do that?
We should start at 1:29 p.m.
We're going to sit here and wait.
No.
Okay.
We're going to make everybody sit and watch us for 45 minutes.
With just that, like, the waiting room music playing on.
That legendary song, there's a song that was originally recorded and then now is widely used as hold music, and some guy just like made it and then by happenstance put it into the public like domain, and then it was, I forget, it's called something Opus, and there's a Wikipedia article about it. Go check it out.
Is that the one they were using like shows like Drawn Together when they're in like a chase scene and then Captain Hero just gets on a conveyor belt and stops. And it's like, it takes 45 minutes for him to go like
elevator music.
And then, anyway. All right. So today's topic is the Mercedes-Benz R129 SL.
Yes. Predictably, we are talking about old Mercedes-Benzes.
But I think it's interesting. I mean, this is a car that
obviously we think it's interesting. That's why we always talk about these cars.
But it's not all about us, Derek Tam-Scott.
No, I quite agree. And there are periodically, it's split. Some people are like, stop talking about damn old Mercedes-Benzes. Other people are like, more discussion of old Mercedes-Benzes.
This was a car that was in Haggerty's UK bull market.
Was it ever in the US one? Has it ever been in the US one? Sorry, I should ask questions that I know the answer to rather than just saying words.
Or questions that I know the answer to that don't embarrass me in front of my boss. I don't know.
Well,
but if it hasn't been, it should have been.
I have long felt that these cars are undervalued, which is why I keep buying them.
Okay, so to back up, the lineage of the SL is quite interesting because it's fucked up.
Yes, SL. We have done a full SL episode. You will recall early on. We had this discussion. And
back in the days when I sang.
Yes, and we skipped the R230 completely, which offended some people.
Well, it was funny because I did an episode at Motor Trend on the SL, and we skipped the R230 completely.
On purpose?
One wasn't available, and I'm like, who cares? No one gives a shit.
Those cars are starting to get interesting, so let us have a brief aside on the R230.
No.
The early ones are garbage. Well, they're not garbage. They're problem prone.
Really? They're not garbage? Have you touched the steering wheel controls or window switches?
It's just not as nice.
It's a Dodge Neon.
It's not as nice, that's for sure. But there are people who are enthusiastic about them, just like people are emerging out of the woodwork who are enthusiastic about W220s or whatever. But apparently the late 129s are great. Great. Late 230s are great.
Do you smile? Can you smile? Can you hold your arms out? Are you having a stroke?
Only with one side.
Not funny.
And the you want like a late SL63 with the P30 package and all the options and stuff, and those are still quite valuable. Okay. Anyway, we have now discussed the R230 on the Carmudgeon Show for an entire 63 seconds.
Too long. Back to the 129. Okay, so the lineage of the SL is interesting because SL, of course, stands for Superleicht. This was proven, not Sportleicht. Mm-hmm. Super leicht, and that was super light in German, and that was given to the 198 300 SL Gullwing,
i.e. the Gullwing, which was not actually super light, and certainly they have not been super light since. Those cars are heavier than you'd expect.
But if I remember it was a space frame chassis, and it was,
which means it's a bunch of tubes. That are all welded to each other.
A high point in the engine compartment. So cool.
Yes.
But it was a race car. It was one of the very few cars that we discussed in a previous episode, possibly last episode,
Yes.
That started out as a race car and that was turned into a road car. And that was it. That was the end.
Of the lineage. No, the
Yes.
SLS. The SLS is probably the most direct successor of the W198.
Yes. So we have the original SL sports car lineage that went 300 SL, W198, to
1952, if you include the race cars, to 1963, which is the last of the 300 SL roadsters.
and then we had nobody home for many, many, many decades.
Yep.
And then SLS, which became
AMG GT.
AMG GT. Wasn't there?
There was the SLR. if you
SLR,
wanna,
yeah.
But the SLR is less sporting in intent than the SLS.
Yeah, but even that wasn't all that. Anyway, so you have that lineage of cars. And then you have the SL, which was started really with the Pagoda, right?
You could perhaps say the 190 SL conceptually is actually pretty similar.
Yeah, fair enough.
The 190 SL was intended to have the looks of the 300 SL at a more accessible price point, which is reflected by the fact that they sold a lot more of them. They were a lot less money. But it sort of did this thing which Mercedes SLs have a great tradition of doing, which is looking really cool and promising a lot, but driving a lot like the sedans from which they are heavily derived.
Yeah.
And that is true of Pagodas. That is true of the next generation, which is the 107. You would know that car if you're not a Mercedes nerd as a 560 SL or a 450 SL.
Or
here
380.
most frequently.
Or
Yes.
280.
Yeah, but not here in the
Or
United
500.
States.
Mm-hmm.
And not here in the United States. But anyone who knows all of that is going to know what the
R107.
designation R107.
R107s lasted 21 model years in the US, I think. 1972
72 probably, or 73 is where
Well,
it started.
Yeah, so 71 production until
Yes.
89
89
production.
was the last year.
Very long life, and that wasn't on purpose, actually.
Right.
It was not supposed to be that long of a life, and the final update, which got it the 560 in the US, and there was a bit of a facelift,
Model year 86.
was model year 86, and that happened because all of Mercedes' development resources were deployed for the new fuel-efficient small cars to meet CAFE. So
Yes.
Mercedes' interim solution when the fuel economy standards came in for the US was to put diesels in everything. That was an interim solution.
And so that's why if you go to model year, call it, 1981, for example, every car that you buy effectively is predominantly diesel, and they're trying to sell mostly diesels. So that means the 123, which is the E-Class, basically, 300D is the primary variant. In fact, the wagon only came here as a 300D. You could get the 240, the 300, and then early on for the 123, you could get the 280E and the 230,
which were 4 and 6
4 and 6
cylinder
gasoline
gas.
engines, but they were basically phased out by the 80s because those were their most voluminous sales cars. And in order to get their average fuel economy up, fleet average fuel economy up, they just put diesels and everything, except for the SL. And then the S-Class was also pushed in that direction starting in 78, 79, the first
300, the
turbo
first
diesel.
world's first turbocharged production diesel for a passenger car.
Yes, although the Peugeot 604 was very close.
That's
like
French.
within a year.
But it's French.
Yes.
Yes. So what happened was the 107 got a bunch of updates. It got galvanized steel at some point. I think that was, I don't remember what year it was. I haven't thought about this in years. But the early cars rust. The late cars rust far less because they were galvanized. And that model year was extended because of this development that was
Generation. That model generation.
I'm sorry.
You said model year.
Yeah. I haven't had.
You haven't
I
had
had one
toast.
cup of coffee. The generation was extended because all engineering resources were deployed for W201 and M102. So if you think W and M, 201,
Yes.
102, that is the 190E.
That's chassis and engine, and also the W124.
124, which grew out of that. And so those were concessions for fuel economy. And so there were no resources. It's very interesting to look at the 129 and realize that as an SL is the flagship of the Mercedes lineup. And yet it was the last to debut with that new design language done by Bruno Sacco.
Right.
So
and this is something that Marks habitually do, is that if they're going to do something really outlandish, they're going to start at the top of the model range and move it down. And so that's why if you think about every time there's a generation shift with, say, BMW, it starts with the 7 Series.
Or it
Is
should.
that right? The
Doesn't
E32
always,
and then
right.
the E34, just like E38 came before E39.
And then E46 was that 3 Series of that same design language. Right. So the
And
idea
so
is
that it trickles down market.
Right. So you're looking at this car and saying, wow, this less expensive car looks and reminds me of the more expensive car.
Mm-hmm.
And the opposite happened at Mercedes. The 126 was the first sort of Bruno Sacco design-ish, but it wasn't fully committed.
And logically, the SL incorporating that should have followed shortly thereafter, but the 126 came out in 1980, and the 129 came out in I think it debuted at 89 in Geneva. If I
129,
correctly.
yeah, I'm sorry, yeah. But the 201 was wound up being the first fully Bruno Sacco designed car in that new wedge-shaped trapezoidal rear section design language, and that was because of fuel economy. And what happened was it started out with the least expensive car, the 201, the 190E, then trickled up in the wrong direction to the W201, W124, which was the midsize car, then trickled up
300E
to the W140. Or no, I guess a 129 was first.
Yes.
And then
right.
W140.
Correct.
But either way, it was backwards, right? It started the cheap car.
And that was out of necessity. It was out of regulatory force, basically, that occurred, which is atypical.
And the interesting thing about that is when you read stuff by Bruno Sacco, that he memoirs and whatnot, he has said, and he's still alive, I would love to meet him. I would get on my knees.
There's a fabulous book about him, by the way.
There is?
Which I recommend, yes.
I should probably read that.
Yes.
We should have probably done our homework before this.
Yeah, we did absolutely no research. We should have.
We talked for 30 seconds before we hit record about that. We both have really good books on the 129.
And have not read them recently or maybe at all.
Mine was years ago. But Sacco feels that 129 was the best.
He used
resolved.
The word perfect.
Yeah,
he does use the word perfect when he describes the 129's
I would
design.
almost agree with him.
I think it's spectacular. I think it's stunning. And it suffers.
But you know why? Why it was perfect and why he thought it was the best resolved car of all of that body language. It's because it sat for almost 10 years. That car was supposed to debut before the 201, and it was designed before the 201. And it had to be put on the back burner. And you can see in the books, which I'm not going to go and get a million inserts of, you guys can buy the books, the sketches of how it evolved from 1978, I think, when the original sketches of that car were done, until 1988, when it finally went, or 87 or so, when it finally got locked in. He had the ability to look at that design for 10 years and iterate and iterate and iterate and refine all of the things that he didn't get right on 201 and 124. Mm-hmm. Very few things, if you ask me. Those cars are almost also perfect.
Yeah. Well, and also you're doing the same language on a different package, which gives you some flexibility with proportions and some ability to, for example, make the rear windscreen more raked, because you don't have to package backseat occupants' heads. I mean, there are supposed to be backseats in the 129, but they're vestigial more than anything else.
Vestigial. When was the last time you used that word in a sentence? Not you. Them.
I was
them. Anyone on planet Earth. Yeah. Anyway, you were saying something about the design.
Oh, I was actually going to go in a slightly different direction, which is that the car, I think, is underappreciated for a number of reasons, which is that they are still wildly cheap. They're wildly inexpensive. They sold quite well, especially for how expensive they were. Do
you know that initially in the U.S. there was $50,000 to $100,000 markup on those cars, and they were $100,000 cars. They were 92 base, 91 for the V8s.
Depends on the model year. So I, in my relentless pursuit of knowledge, bought price. That's perfection. Bought price cards for the North American market for 1994 and 95. And there was a $10,000 price drop on the SL500 between 94 and 95 as the Deutschmark, I guess, weakened. Or strengthened.
I don't understand how that works.
But yes, the cars were incredibly hot. And it's so interesting when you watch, again, John Davis reading like his review of the car when it first came out, the SL500. Because he makes this sort of like prophetic, I don't know, maybe it's not prophetic because it hasn't come true, but he says this is a future classic. Yeah. And, it's taken a long time. I think the cars are headed in that direction. They certainly deserve it. In my opinion, it is the best SL after the W198. Look,
we talk about how some cars are on the market for a really, really long time, right? Now, the one that everyone keeps talking about is the
GTR.
GTR is 10 years old. No, older than that.
It's like 14.
GTR and Tesla Model S, those are really old cars. That SL was 19 years old. Mm-hmm. And so you have the typical...
Other people did stuff like this back then. It was a different time, like XJS.
Yeah, okay, but hold on. But
928.
928 was just a failure from start to finish. But that SL went so long. Think about the average age of a 107 buyer, R107 buyer. They didn't make
140.
it. Right. They were dead by the time the 129 came out. So there was a decade of pent up demand of people who were like, I am about to kick it. I've been waiting to buy a new fucking SL, and I had a 350 and then a 450 and then a 380 and then a 560. I just want a new body style SL. I'm rich, I'm old, I'm dying, I need something. And of course they were going to pay $100,000 over.
It was also there was a huge car market bubble in 1989.
Yep.
Massive, bigger than anything that's happened since, especially because the collapse was so precipitous. And so Testarossas, which are $120,000 MSRP cars, were selling for $300,000. 275 GTBs were $800,000 when they had been 150, a year or two before, and then they went back to 200. It was a big bubble in '89,
so you have this
and so this car got swept up in that, and led to these big markups. But
big markups and huge sales numbers, huge.
Yes. Yeah, and my first SL. No, this car was not a car I bought. It was a car I looked up but did not buy. It was sold in '91 as a used car, and it sold for MSRP, even though it was a used car, because it was a reflection of that era for those cars. So we've talked about them being great. We haven't offered too much specificity other than to say that the design is great.
So let's talk about variants for a second. So in the US, the first to go on sale was the SL 300 SL. Actually, I think it
did it predate.
I think it predated
SL?
the 500, but the first two models were 300 SL, which was
and 500 SL.
The 300 SL was a all new 24 valve straight six.
All new from the pistons up.
Okay, a new variant of an existing straight six called an M104.
That's the twin cam version.
Twin cam. They were all the 300 SLs were all twin cam.
In the US.
In the US.
There was a 12 valve version.
There were plenty of other. There was 280s. There was all kinds of other stuff. But in the US, we got 300 SL, which is a 24 valve. That was badged 300 SL hyphen 24. Hyphen
in
just like
Europe.
In Europe.
But not here.
Here it was just called a 300 SL. And it was a 5-speed automatic. And one of the world's first 5-speed. I think it was the first 5-speed electronically controlled automatic.
Mm-hmm.
The 500.
Or you could get it with a 5-speed manual.
Yes. I haven't gotten there yet. And by the way, while we're there, it's not just a 5-speed, it's a dogleg 5-speed transmission. According to Mercedes, they sold 166 of them in the US. There's all kinds
I think the numbers are probably higher.
They didn't know. I mean, I had a 300 SL 5-speed, and I called Mercedes historian, and she told me that my car was gray market. And I'm like, that's kind of funny because I have the original window sticker. And she's like, we didn't sell a manual 129 here. I'm like, yes, you did. Send her the original window sticker. And she's like, get the fuck out. And came back a couple days later with we sold 166 of them. We think that's the correct number, but in any case, it's fewer than 200 is what I was told. I've heard all kinds of different numbers. That was an interesting car. That straight six had variable valve timing on the intake cam and Bosch CIS. So it was an old K-Jetronic fuel injection from the 1960s, 70s with variable valve timing.
Right,
7,
and the horsepower goes from 100. The single cam version is the M103 that has 177 horsepower in US trim. No change in displacement. Power goes to 217 or something like that, or 220, just by adding 4 valve heads.
228 PS, whatever it was. Yeah, huge power bump,
and you can get a 40 horsepower change by putting a 4, which is, I suppose, typical. To put,
but 7,000 RPM, right? 7,000 RPM. So when you think of a 24 valve 3 liter or 3 point something liter straight six that revs to $7,000, your mind goes to M, not Mercedes
or
BMW M.
Toyota 2JZ.
Yeah, fair enough. But of course the star car. So I've owned one of those cars. M104 is great and all that, but the star was the 500 SL.
So this car had an all-new engine, not all new.
Yeah, don't pull that same shit.
Same level of all new as the M104, which is to say that they just put 4 valve heads on the car and an engine that had been around since the 70s.
But this was an all aluminum block version of that 70s engine, right? Which came out technically earlier. This was the M119 V8. God, we're nerds. So this was a 5 liter.
This is basic Mercedes stuff.
It was basic Mercedes stuff, but it was a 5 liter V8 version of basically that 3 liter straight six, right? Same head design, same cam design. So it had variable valve timing on the intake side. 4 cams, 30. I can't do this math. 32 valves, 302 horsepower.
Nope, that's the M113's output.
Oh God, I can't
That's
remember.
also the C43's. It's
a lot.
It's 326 PS, 322 horsepower in the US market with CIS.
Okay. Thank you for that.
That would be model years 1990 to 92.
That had a 4-speed automatic.
Correct. 722.
And if you drive one of these early 4-speed cars with a M119 in it, you will actually curse out loud when you floor it. They're really fast.
But you won't be able to hear it because if you're really getting an early car that doesn't have ASR, then you're going to get just a lot of tire screeching.
Which is fun.
Yes,
it's
pretty
an
festive.
old man Mercedes. Yeah.
Yes.
I love that engine. I absolutely adore the sound, the power delivery. It's one of these like wakes up right off the line, huge
Good torque. Yep.
And then at 4,000 does the cam change, and then has this build of torque and a surge towards its. I think it only revs to what, 6,500.
Yeah, it's definitely lower than the 104. It's 6 or 64 or something.
Something like that. But it pulls like a motherfucker up top. So, it's that great, that naturally aspirated power delivery that I live for, which is like, wow, okay, oh my God, oh, Jesus Christ. And then it shifts and it does it again. Love that engine.
Yeah.
That was a how many year only engine that was only ever in the SL?
With CIS? 90 to 92.
2. Right. So that was 3 model years only. That was what they called the long block. So that was a tall block. Right. So there was the 93 model year that switched to the short deck 500, which was the
LH.
engine that went into the 500E.
1 year earlier in the 500E. So 92, this engine was available in the 500E. And then for 93, they were like, okay, we're going to put it in the SL as well. And
so this was the same bore and stroke, just different rod length. So that brought the deck down. That needed to be the case. It needed to be done that way to fit under the W124's hood. And then they put LH fuel injection in it, which is a hot air mass airflow sensor.
It is contemporary fuel injection instead of mechanical fuel injection that is from the 70s with electronic control added on, which we had the pleasure of spending probably 12 full hours with when I bought my first SL, trying to get it to idle correctly.
Yeah. Yep.
So I'm a big fan of getting a 93 or later with the LH, so you don't have to deal with the CIS. The other thing that it really does change is you probably get a 25% improvement in fuel economy. And of course, when you're buying an SL, you don't really care about fuel economy. But with CIS, the thing gets like 11 to 13 miles a gallon. It is so thirsty that even with a huge fuel tank, you're just like, man, I have to buy gas constantly. And so it's the unluxurious thing of buying gas frequently, even with it's maybe an 85 liter tank or something. It's more than 20 gallons. And you still are buying fuel so frequently. It's like, get 220 mile range with CIS. So I prefer LH because it's less of a pain to deal with and you get more useful cruising range.
That to me is really interesting that you get that much of a difference, because in other applications from other manufacturers, CIS actually delivers really good fuel economy, but for whatever reason in Mercedes it never does. But there's a lot of transition in 129 because, all right, so you start out with a one fuel injection and then you transition to a different fuel injection and a different physical block and rods and, and rotating.
3 years in.
And then
93. Well, and then there's another change between 93 and 94. So,
well, other than the badge, right? Because the badge for 94 went to SL 500.
Instead of 500 SL. And you lost the underline. And that was part of an entire rationalization of Mercedes model lines. Everything was numbered, then followed by letters. And the whole origin of this is the fact that there was a 190E 2.6 and a 300E, which they called a 260E with the same engine. And the designation wasn't rational, wasn't logical. Right. And so the whole arrival of the C-Class was oriented towards trying to make it more like rational, sensible, like BMW does.
It made perfect sense.
Yes, it makes perfect sense. So the SL, they just moved the SL to the beginning. They lost the underline on the badge. The other change for 2 other changes between 93 and 94, do you know what they are?
Was 94 went to the 5-speed?
Nope. That was a 96.
Shit. It's going to be like something ridiculously small, like door panels or something.
Yes, they went from perforated door panels to the gathered leather between 93 and 94.
Okay.
There's one other change. It's also
stereo?
inside the car. Yes, the radio. They went from the Becker 1432 to the Becker 1492.
You are such a fucking nerd.
Well, it has the twisty knob for the radio, for the volume, because everyone would always complain about the Becker and how hard it was to use because it has all these identical buttons. Although it does have the very useful star button if you have a Becker in your car. One of these Grand Prix, you hit star, and then the numbers on that dials your radio station in, so you don't have to seek for radio station.
Star 987 puts you to 98.7. And that was the same until after 220. I think. Really? Yeah, even 221 had it had a little flip-up keypad, and you'd hit star 1003, and you're at 100.3. But now that no one listens to radio anymore, what's FM?
Yes. So that was the change between 93 and 94. 94 and 95 are identical, except for they changed the front turn signal lenses from amber to clear.
With an amber insert on the US car. With an amber
reflector in the US. Yeah. And in the rear, all the US cars have a red reflector insert.
Yes.
Which is true.
And then shit got funky.
In 96.
In 96
model year.
So 96 model year had a facelift, which changed
inside and out.
Changed the taillights from 3 ribs to 2.
Interesting. I don't know that I knew that.
The taillights had the sort of hard-edged ribs that were there for the fun.
Yeah, and then they changed. No, those were 99. The scalloped ones arrived in 99.
They did?
Yes.
Okay, so I know I thought that was a change. The other one is the side strakes went from
3 to 2, and they're soft and squishy, exactly. And the lower cladding is reshaped, the bumpers are reshaped, the fog lights are shaped differently.
But I thought that was a taillight update for 96.
They changed the taillights to be less amber and more red, but they still have the ridges, and the ridges disappeared after the 98 model year.
Okay, I knew there were 3 different taillights.
Yes.
But the big
change. This is
so
interesting.
Well, then the interior went from absolutely wonderful to complete shit.
Yes.
So I'm sorry to say this. Bruno Sacco's original design, inside and out, was clean and purposeful and Italian and wonderful.
And just sort of crisp.
Right.
It lost the crispness. It went blobby the way everything else went blobby in the 90s.
It got that horrible steering wheel. It got ugly seats. It got ugly door panels. It got crappy HVAC buttons that instead of a perfectly... every time you touch them would like sploosh in, and they're just... Big quality reduction, and this was the Daimler Chrysler era, the beginning of the Daimler Chrysler era, where everything was
cost-cutting because Lexus had come in and was like, oh, by the way, here's a product for $40,000, the SC, and everyone's standing around looking at SLs for $100,000 or $90,000, after 94 for the SL 500. Interestingly, the price did not change between 94 and 95 for the 600.
We haven't gotten to the 600.
We have not gotten to the 600, and we are going out of orders. We should go back. Let's return to the 600. Or do you want to go finish the evolution?
Sure, we can go. We can go back to the 600. So, because 600 was a V12. The 600 was not originally part of the product lineup. I don't know if you know this.
It didn't appear till 92.
It wasn't even planned in the original.
Well, yes, you can tell that by the fact that they had to lengthen the car in order to fit the engine.
Yep. They also had to do something else. When the car was finalized and in its final engineering, BMW came out with their V12, or they found out that BMW was about to come out with their hold on, what's that engine called? Ooh, I can't think of what that engine code is.
M70?
M70.
Wow, that took a lot of digging.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So the BMW is about to come out with their M70, and you know the way the German car industry works. They're all looking at each other and chasing each other's tails. And Mercedes is saying this, no phase that BMW will come out with this engine and we won't have a V12. So at the last second, they had to start the engineering process for the 12. And the first thing they did was increase the diameter of the overall diameter of the wheel and tire package to be able to fit brakes large enough to slow down a V12 car from its max speed. This is now before they'd agreed on the 156 mile an hour top speed gentleman's agreement thing. And so they had to go back and fundamentally re-engineer the entire car around this larger wheel package at the 11th hour in 1987 or 88, because they found out that BMW was coming out with the V12. What they didn't do is be able to fit the fucking engine in until after it was already in production. And that's
why the V12 variant was late to arrive. It was 2 model years later.
And it's a substantial difference. The crazy thing to me is that the V12 is the same length as the straight 6 was. If you think of it, it's just wider. But the cooling package was so large that it has a different hood, different bumper.
I don't know if the hood is different, but the bumper is definitely. Right. And if you look at the car side by side, now I can't unsee this, but when you look at an early V12 car, it has this like sort of underbite, like a
we dog, both did the same,
like a pug.
Yeah.
And that's to fit all of the additional junk in there. And the other thing that Mercedes did with this 12-cylinder engine compared to BMW is that it's a dual overhead cam design. It has more displacement, and so it makes 389 horsepower instead of 326 horsepower from BMW's V12, which incidentally is the same number of horsepower that Mercedes V8 makes. So
not a coincidence, I'm sure. Yeah. So this V12 was like that straight 6 and that V8. That was all done together. So car companies tend to make a family.
Dual overhead cam design. Right. Does it have also intake variable valve timing? Car
companies will make a family of engines that's based on one combustion chamber. So they engineer one combustion chamber, and then you put it in however many cylinders you want. So this was 2 of those straight 6s, 2 3-liter straight 6s, make a 6-liter V12. That had a dual intake variable valve timing, but it did not use CIS.
No.
It did started out with LH-Jetronic, which was a real fuel injection. Monster of a motor. Huge power. One of the greatest starter sounds in the world. All like V12s.
Yes, to be used in the S-Class, the W140, as well as the Pagani Zonda. Has anyone else used that engine for anything?
Probably. I don't know.
Is
those are the ones
Dara? No.
Somebody
Maybe
probably
Derek
did something.
Commendatore.
Yes. So the V12 also had a 4-speed. Okay, so now we're out to the 90. So that continued on. The 12 was no faster to 60 than the V8 was.
It's like 2/10
slower or something?
No, it's faster. It's 6.0 versus like 6.2, 6.3.
Their numbers, right?
But both tested by What a Week.
Oh.
I'm just using the same testing regime.
Yeah. I thought Car Driver had similar. They were within a 10. Whatever, it's within the noise. But once you start expanding to the quarter mile, and then you floor both of those cars at 100 miles an hour, and those V12s, the 600s, are genuinely staggeringly fast. And it got also staggeringly heavy.
Yes.
So the 300 SL stick that I had was 30. I'm going to have to look this up, but I feel like it was 3,600 and something pounds.
That's lighter than I would expect.
Yeah, I think it was like 3628. It would be interesting to see if I remember correctly because I weighed it.
I thought it would be more like 38.
I could be wrong. I probably should look this up, but I'm not going to. The V12s were over 4,400.
Yes.
They were really heavy. And the V8s were
4,150.
4,150. So it was quite a lot more weight. That's one of the reasons they weren't all that much quicker. Traction was an issue, obviously, when you're dealing with 400 horsepower. And so they continued, but we're back to now to the 96 facelift.
Or did we finish with that?
Well, then there was an engine change again.
That's for the 99 facelift.
Okay.
But we neglected to mention that in 96, they added the 5-speed transmission to the non-6-cylinder cars.
The interesting thing about the 5-speed edition was it was not a revised gear set. So the car was exactly the same speed because all the 5th gear was a longer cruising gear. So 1 through 4 were identical ratio.
Which, having owned one of those cars, I understand because...
Yeah, I mean, it's extra fuel economy and it's extra quiet without any change in acceleration.
Exactly.
I mean, I would have wished for shorter 1 through 4 just for more acceleration, but...
It's not a poorly chosen initial ratio, though, a set of ratios for the 1 through and the 4-speed cars.
They'll smoke I mean, if you're not careful, you can really incinerate the tires off the line. So, I mean, I guess you don't really want a shorter first.
Yeah. And this is using a 265 rear end in the SL 500. This is why the E500, which uses substantially the same mechanical content, is quite a bit faster because they not only shorten the rear end ratio to 282 from 265, but they also, that car weighs 3850 instead of 4150. Right. So it's 300 pounds lighter and it has a shorter rear end ratio, and that's why the 500E is such a monster. 99 facelift.
99 facelift was a big one because that was where you really saw the cost cutting in the powertrain department. So it was another interior.
So you lost the M104.
And lost the 4-cam V8 in favor of a 2-cam V8. So double overhead cam to single overhead cam.
Yep.
4 valves per cylinder to 3 valves per cylinder. Yep. The only thing that got better...
M113.
The only thing that got better was it got twice as many spark plugs.
Yep.
Because it needed that to pass emissions tests.
Brilliant.
That's not what you want to hear from a Mercedes-Benz. So we sort of all blasted it. In time, though, the M113 has really aged well because they're really reliable.
Yeah, they're very durable. They're not very complex. They last well. But to be fair, 119s also do that.
Yeah. I mean, 119s, the early ones have the CIS, though, which is inherently problematic because they're not computer controlled and you can't talk to them.
They also consume a fair amount of ignition components, and they're pretty expensive ignition components. Those cars are very sensitive to the ignition system. Yeah. You just need to have good caps and rotors and the insulators behind them. The
spark arrestor behind them, which everyone leaves out and then wants to know why
and then the car starts running garbage. But there's an insulator cap behind it. So if you're in there, do one of those.
Just do it right.
God, nobody will care about this except for people who are avid Mercedes owners. But those of you who are...
But the interesting thing is that an SL500 and an SL500 were not the same car. Again, one is a variable valve timing 4-cam 32 valve V8 and the other one is a non-variable valve timing. That was, by the way,
derived from a Le Mans race car. We left that bit out, but that's why that engine was developed in that way. The 117 was the 2-cam version that was used in the 420 SEL and the 560 SEL and every other damn Mercedes V8 in the 80s. And they went to Le Mans racing and they needed a turbocharged quad-cam 32-valve engine to make 900 horsepower to go around Le Mans. And they won an 89 with that car, the Sauber C9.
So yeah, all they really did was pull off the turbos, and voila, you have the 500 street engine, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, especially for a car of that genre. Normally you would read about that happening with something like a Ferrari or something like that. But for Mercedes to do that, I think is particularly charming.
Pretty neat.
So the 12-cylinder did not get any of this cost cutting, by the way. The 12-cylinder engine, the M120,
it did later. Not in the 129.
In the 129, correct. They through the end of the 129's production in 2002, they always use the same 12-cylinder. And so if I were to forced to get a late R129, I would be
forced gunpoint.
I would be like, maybe I got to get the V12 in that case. Ordinarily, I would not choose the V8.
Here's the thing:
V12.
that 119 is quick, and probably
113 or 119.
I'm sorry, 113.
That's the 3-valve engine.
3-valve engine is quick and reliable and efficient and all of that other stuff. It makes about the same horsepower.
That's the one that makes 302 horsepower.
302,
so it lost
15
or so.
And I think it gained a tiny little bit of torque peak. I'm sure it's at 1 RPM. But that with the 5-speed and whatever, they were sufficiently quick. My problem with the 113 is personality. They sound the same at low revs. It's just a Mercedes V8. But where the M119 has that variable valve change and suddenly wakes up and builds and builds and builds and builds, the M113 is a torque monster from idle to redline. That makes it quicker in the real world down low, but it takes away that personality,
the fizz, which is probably not something that most SL buyers would have cared about then. But the people who buy them now,
fun about a granddaddy's car like that hikes up its skirt and fucking lights them up and goes.
Yes, it is the 6.9 formula. It is the Bentley Turbo R formula. It is a timeless formula for car enjoyment, which is something. It's a Q car kind of experience. And
every time I'm in a 113 car, I'm like, wow, this is quick. And every time I'm in a 119 SL, I laugh out loud. I'm like, holy shit. And it's really funny that the subjective impressions is so different between two cars that have 5-liter V8s and the same ish horsepower, whatever. But the laugh factor is definitely there on the M119 cars. Strange that the number 119 is greater than the later one M113.
Yes, but this is typical for Mercedes, just like OM606 versus OM617 for their diesel engines. And so there's varying opinions about which one is the one to have. Are there? Yeah, a lot of people prefer the late cars. Late cars are more valuable. An AMG pack M113 car is more valuable than a pre-facelift car.
Okay, but when you say varying opinions, you're not talking about in this room, right?
No, not in this room. God, no. I think are 100% aligned.
So let's get this straight. If you are a Carmudgeon listener and you're looking at an R129 Mercedes-Benz SL, you are to buy
an M119 powered car.
No, an M119 powered car with LH fuel injection.
With LH, but pre-facelift, in my opinion.
I agree.
So that leaves 3 model years, which are exactly the 3 model years that I'm always looking for when I'm looking for 119. I will not consider an SL, an R129 SL, that does not a 93, 94, or 95 500.
I'd be the same way. And I think the
but
facelift,
some people really want the 5-speed. Small sidebar. If you want an AMG kit car, AMG kit was offered starting in 97 on 3 models in Mercedes line. You could get the C280 Sport, you could get the E420 Sport. This is before the E55 arrived. So it looks like an E55, but it's an E420 with the AMG kit and monoblocks and stuff. Or you could get it on the SL500. Maybe the 600 too. Certainly the 500. And so you got the AMG body kit, which is handsome. I like it. It's polarizing. Some people really dislike it. I don't mind it. You got the monoblocks. It's kind of this tuner car look. And you still have the M119. You get the 5-speed. And so some people will be like, give me a 98 or 99 AMG kit car with the M119 and a 5-speed. That's an acceptable alternative in my eyes if you're okay with the facelift interior.
I mean, look, the facelift interior ruins the car for me because all the soberness of the original Sacco design is gone.
There's a rationality and crispness that is replaced with 90s blobby.
And more so just gaudy cheapness.
Yes.
So a good friend of mine who's also a friend of yours has a late car, and he's going to kill me for saying this, but it's like a bluish black. I don't remember exactly what the paint is with
some kind of Disegno thing.
It's a Disegno paint with a red interior. And no, it just doesn't. To me, the SL was so sober and understated that tarting it up with ultimately cheap materials because they just don't age well.
Because they were trying to save cost, just be competitive.
And he wanted a late car, and then so interestingly enough, his mom wanted an SL, so he found a 4-speed. I think it's a 4-speed. I don't remember if it's a 4-speed. No, it's got to be a 4-speed because it's an M119 car. It's an early, or the late ones, right? But it's an early.
Those were 5 speeds. When they did the facelift, they went to 5 speeds. 96. Yeah, but it's
previous, so it's an early. He got his mom a green early pre-facelift 500.
I think it's a post-facelift. I remember.
Fuck. Why can't I lie about anything in front of you?
Anyway, it's a 5-speed.
He got, all right, one way or another, he got an M119 car for his mom, bought it super cheap. It's a 20,000 mile car, absolutely stunningly beautiful. And he loved it so much, but he wanted a 113 car because he wanted the late interior. And he didn't listen to me and he bought it and he loves the way it looks. Great. That's a personal taste issue. But every time he goes and drives his mom's car, he's like, I want an M119. Mm-hmm. There's the proof. If you're into the flash of the way the late cars look, great, good for you. You're blind and those taillights are terrible and the front end is horrible and the fucking interior sucks. Sorry about your vision, but the 119 is the better drive. Sorry.
Yeah. And then so we haven't sort of not quite touched on why you don't want a 12-cylinder car. But in essence, it's heavier, it's not faster. You get the 12-cylinder experience. If we are to adhere to David E. Davis's perspective that everyone should own a 12-cylinder car, that's a good way to do it. Model year is less material. Although if I were to have a 12-cylinder car, there's a big difference between the way Germans do 12 cylinders and the way the Italians do 12 cylinders.
Yeah. So, I mean, all you got to do is do the videos, look for a video of a W140 or a W220 with equal-length headers. And that's what the Italians would have done. So we're going to have to do an insert here, but listen to what these engines could sound like. Yes. Or could have. And, now the way they really sound is they were horribly unequal length, exhaust runner length and header lengths. And so they just sound like nothing.
Yeah, the one SL600 that I drove had mufflers on it, but nothing else. And I was disappointed by the noise. It's just more volume, but not good noise. And I was really expecting, you have to do the headers in order to get the magic. It was just sort of like dull roaring and stuff.
BMW did the same with the M70 and the.
Well, it's a luxury car. Right. We have to remember the original mission of these cars was luxury, and so.
You know what luxury means to me? Very quiet screaming. I mean, it would be amazing to do that, but I would choose a 500 over 600 without question. I would choose a 500 over the 300, even the stick.
Yeah.
The thing about that 300 SL stick, the dogleg, is they're not slow. They feel dog slow, but so you've been in my Mark 1 Volkswagen Cabriolet with a 2-liter 16-valve swap, right? This is a car that came with 90 horsepower and was slow and now has 170 and is not slow, makes all kinds of noise, vibration, screams, spins its tires. And would you describe that car as brisk and quick?
Which the
Cabby?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly feels like it. It's very exciting.
It's very exciting. I raced the Cabriolet and the SL and actually have a video that I did afterwards of the 2 speedometers that I can put right here. They're the same speed. And that was the craziest thing to me is this psychotic experience.
Because in the SL, you're like, is it on?
Is it on? Is it turned on? Is it going? And that's the difference. It never pulls hard, but it continues to pull. It's
a very refined power delivery, which is exactly what you'd expect from a Mercedes-Benz.
Sounds great.
It does. It sounds a lot like a BMW S52 or something like that.
Just quieter and and less grit, so smoother.
Yes.
More airy, more of that.
And it revs really nicely. It pulls all the way to 7,000, which feels absurd to be driving a gigantic Mercedes living room. And this exact powertrain was every single 24-valve 6-cylinder car that Mercedes offered at that time, which were numerous, had that same powertrain, the dogleg. Yeah. So you could get it in the W124 as well, not in the US. You could get it in the S-Class. There was a dogleg S-Class with that engine in it.
Imagine how fucking slow that was.
Really, because that thing weighs as much as the sun. So yeah, that was the way that Mercedes did powertrains back then. If you got the 24 valve engine, you got a dogleg if it was a manual.
And you never got. They did make the 3. So they made a 3.2 version. So the SL300, which we didn't talk about, became. Or the 300 SL became
the SL320, but that was never offered as a manual.
It was never offered as a manual, but also it kept the 5-speed automatic, and it got variable intake length runners.
And LH.
And that only revved to 6,500, very different car again. That I do not like.
It was phased out, I think, after 97 or 98, and for the U.S. market. And so at the end of U.S. production, you could only get the 8 and the 12. Meanwhile, in Europe, that was replaced by a V6. Which is why I guess they didn't want to bring that here.
Oh, God, thank God. So, I'm sorry, a V6 in a Mercedes-Benz. There has never been an acceptable V6 in any Mercedes-Benz, possibly the 72-degree V6, the diesel. I might accept the 72-degree V6 because it's 72 degrees, and who does that? And that's stupid and therefore cool.
Well, that's what you're supposed to do in a V6, isn't
120.
it? 60.
120. So 120 is the proper, which now Ferrari and McLaren are doing. 60 is the second substitute. 90 is never acceptable. 72 is just dumb. And 54, which GM did, and therefore Alfa Romeo did, is also stupid. Therefore cool. Yes, that. And I digress. No V6 ever in any Mercedes. I don't care. There's not
allowed.
Not, the best of nothing. Then it should have been nothing.
Or nothing. Yeah. So my choice is or nothing.
Or nothing. There is no choice. It's just nothing. No, thank you. No V6. So now that we've defined 500 SL as the right choice on 129s. What are the problem? So this is really turning into a buyer's guide, but I don't want it to be a buyer's guide. It's more like an informational thing. 129 was the high point for, let's back up for a second, for the SL. And here's why. The 220 was a pile of shit. It was
230.
I'm sorry, 230. R230 was, that whole generation sort of revolves around the 220 S class, right?
Yes, it was the first full articulation of them cheaping the fuck out, right? And that included the W203 Mr. Peanut headlight C class, and the W210 horribly ugly E class. Although there's a notable difference, like with the 202, when they facelifted the 202. So that's the C class, first generation C class. And when they facelifted the R129, they both got cheaper. Yeah. And then the same thing happened with the 210 E class, the 4 headlight E class, the first one. The early ones are nicer than the later ones. Or less unnice than the later ones. Yeah,
I mean, look, I had a post-facelift W202 that was a C43 AMG, and that was the only way. So pre-facelift was the C36, which is a 3.6 liter straight six. Post-facelift was the C43, which is a 4.3 liter V8. I wouldn't have traded it for an early car. I didn't care that it was crappy inside because that fucking V8.
I had the early car. I had the C36.
And you kept it for 0 time, and I kept my V8 for a lot longer.
The real reason why actually I kept it such a short time is that I bought a one-owner 33,000 mile car, and I felt so bad about using it that I never drove it.
It was signal red, wasn't it?
It was Imperial red. The darker red. Yeah. And I do miss that car, but I also know that I would have never driven it. And so I actually went last weekend and looked at a black
one,
a black 120,000.
I keep sending that link around.
It's not very good. No, but
I mean, it's cheap.
It's so that black C36 that's on Craigslist. It's got good bones and it was obviously well maintained, but the paint was redone and not well.
Okay,
that's the fundamental issue.
I've never driven a C36. You never let me drive yours. You're mean.
I think you did drive it because you put it on scales. I have a photo of it on scales and I wasn't there. You weighed it.
I didn't drive it. How is that possible? Somebody else drove it to me?
I don't know. Anyway, it's a cool car. It's wonderful. It's actually possibly the best driving Mercedes of the 90s.
The C36. My C43 was spectacular because you know that the V8 was actually lighter than the 6-cylinder.
Okay.
And better weight distribution because it's further back. Because it's only 4 cylinders long instead of 6. So wins in every way. Except
that the interior is garbage.
Well, and that the C36 was actually quicker to 60 for some fucking god unknown reason. Anyway, gearing or something. I don't know. More importantly, SLs. All right. So I really think 129 is a high point because 230 was just kind of cheap inside. And I think it lost the simple elegance of the 129's design.
Yes, and everybody did this at the same time. Everybody did this at the same time, by the way. BMW did this at the same time. It's just a shift of modern cars. This is why everybody who's into Radwood cars, it's like things were different and better then. I mean, you see it in Honda Accords, right? The Honda Accord, the one with the flip-up headlights that came out in 86 or whatever it was, it has a really clean, rational look to it, and the generation right after it does. And then things start to go a little blobby after that for everyone.
Fair enough.
It's just a sign of the times.
The 220, I don't think advanced the SL. So the 129 was a huge advance in technology over the 107.
Well, it should have been. It was replacing something that had been around for 20 years.
But it was the world's first fully automatic roof where you didn't have to pull levers or anything.
I am dealing with the pleasures of that at this very moment.
We'll get to that in a second. So the roof was the world's first fully automatic convertible. It was the world's first seat-mounted seat belts.
Really?
And those seats
with magnesium frame.
Magnesium frames. And all of that was done because they had all of these extra years to develop this car. And in their rollover tests, they thought, how can we possibly protect people? So it was also the world's first car with a full
retractable roll bar.
Right. That automatically popped up in a third of a second in an event of a rollover. So you had that. And then you had
considerably longer if you're using the switch.
Yeah. The switch moves it slowly, but
it's hydraulic. Yes.
Yeah. But it's a ratchet.
There's a ratchet thing.
Yeah. It goes.
We know someone who has set it off in the course of motoring spiritedly.
It happens. So this was the idea, was that in a rollover, you have the seatbelt is positioned as closest to your shoulder as possible, as close to your shoulder as possible. I speak good. And would then, with a very strong magnesium seat frame, help you from being thrown out of the car.
Plus the roll bar.
Huge. And by the way, the hardtop, which I think the 129 looks even better with a hardtop on it than it does with a soft top.
I agree.
Which is also really cool to put on because you place it on and you hit a button and the hydraulics pull it down, becomes a structural member. And so that car becomes even stiffer with the hardtop on it.
And more aerodynamic. I think the coefficient of drag goes down by 0.02. I think it goes from like 0.34 to 0.32 or 0.32 to 30 or something like that. But it goes down by 0.02.
I have a chart with all of the CDs with every combination, including the world's first ever wind deflector,
yes,
which also reduced the air, the CD. I mean, the thing from a technological standpoint,
and the hardtop was standard.
It was. They all came with a hardtop, and no one wanted them, so you could delete the hardtop after. I think after a couple of model years, they made it optional again. No one wanted them because it weighs 80 pounds.
Yeah,
100 pounds. It's unwieldy, and the way it's designed, the back corners right below behind the C pillars have these very sharp dicks that stick down and then are received into the car. And as you're putting it on, you invariably miss the hole and scratch the shit out of your paint. So just a bad design. Should have been somehow otherwise, secured. But no rust issues on these cars. Robust chassis.
Well, anything will have a rust issue if you.
Yeah, but some cars are notorious. Yes. Hondas in different spots and other Mercedes, like a W220, they rot from the inside out because they have water-based primer that cracks and allows water in. No rust issues. No major mechanical issues.
There are going to be people who will say, but what about?
Okay, so let's talk about it. What about roof?
Wiring harness?
Well, okay. Okay. So first thing, roof. Because this is all of them.
Yes.
So I win because it's a bigger issue. There are 13, 12.
Depends on the model year. There are 12 cylinders in the early cars, and they deleted the left locking cylinder for the tonneau cover starting in 96, I believe.
Okay, so it's 11 or 12. I knew there was an odd number in there. And these
hydraulic cylinders.
Very high pressure hydraulic cylinders that are used to actuate the top mechanism. So you have a pump, it's an electric pump that pressurizes the system.
It is in the trunk under the spare.
And it goes, and the sound of that thing when it locks is like a prison cell locking.
Yes.
Very, very Mercedes.
Yes.
But the cylinders leak.
The cylinders do leak. And there's a main I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to describe what they all do. They're to make the top do various things, to make it lock, to make the tonneau cover open and shut, and lift the whole thing.
And the cylinders from Mercedes, the last time I looked was 10 years ago, were over $500 a piece. Times 12 becomes a very expensive job. However,
there are probably more than one place, but there's a place that's well known called Top Hydraulics that rebuilds the cylinders. If you send them to them, they're in Florence, Oregon. I mailed one this morning.
And they're $50, $100?
It depends which one. Yeah. It's between, basically 45 to maybe 110, depending which cylinder it is. To do all of them, it's $700.
Yeah,
to rebuild them.
Not bad.
To do all 12.
Yeah. And so that is an issue.
Some of them are a real bitch to get out. I have been cursing at them for weeks.
So your car is currently in surgery.
I'm currently doing, a cylinderectomy.
I got rid of mine long before I had to do that because fuck that shit.
It's not a ideal job. There's a lot of like fiddling, and it's just accessibility is not great. But I am doing it myself. So
okay. There's that. You're also doing, or you don't. So the wiring harness issue is an interesting one because one of the people who wanted to buy my SL, he was very, very interested, but his mechanic screamed at him and told him he cannot buy a 300 SL because of the wiring harness issue. That
is horseshit.
Exactly.
Because your car is a CIS car, and the CIS cars do not have the wiring harness issue.
Right. The wiring harness issue came on the LH later cars, the 320s, because during the cost-cutting era, also Mercedes caved to pressure from the Green Party in Germany and made recyclable, biodegradable wiring loom. So basically the rubber on the wire.
Which it began doing almost immediately.
Self-recycling. So so they short out, stuff doesn't work properly, you can have a fire.
Yeah, so there are two harnesses. There's an upper harness and a lower harness. The upper harness controls like mostly engine functions and traction control and stuff like that. It's very easy to determine whether the harness has been done. There's a little sticker on the harness that's under the hood, and you lift up the little cover there and look at it, and you see the date. And if the date is like 1993, you're like, fuck. If it's like 1999 and the car's a 93, or 2007 or whatever, then you're like, okay, the upper harness has been done.
But the one of the harnesses is bigger and the smaller. It's just a wiring loom with a bunch of connectors on it, and it's not a big job, right?
No, it's an hour to get in and an hour to get out to do the lower one. I just did it on the E320.
Right. So this is not, this is like a problem area, but it's inexpensive-ish to address.
I mean, it's certainly better than doing head bolts or rod bearings on certain other German cars.
I don't like called BMWs. I mean, let's start with M. Yeah, all you do is you unplug a bunch of connectors and replug in the new ones. You're done. Mm-hmm. It's not, cracking.
The upper harness is available. Its price varies, but it's like $1,000-ish, maybe a little more. But they used to be cheaper. The lower harness is NLA for the 320. I don't know what it is for the other cars, but there's people out there who rebuild them.
I'm sure there is. Yeah. That's a lot of money. Okay, $1,000 is more than I expected for the harness. Right.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's a Mercedes-Benz. Transmissions don't usually go?
Yes, they do.
They do not.
Yes, they do. It's the same transmission that every other
722, isn't it?
Yeah, they always go between 80 and 120,000 miles.
That's not been my experience.
Yes, that's something that always everyone is always checking for these. They're like, how long does it take to select reverse is one of the go-to tests, because there's a B2 piston, which is the one that engages reverse, and eventually the seal fails and it can't build enough hydraulic pressure to engage reverse.
You can if you rev the engine.
To build hydraulic pressure. Yeah, so seeing how long it takes for the car to select reverse. But anyway, transmissions do go on these cars.
Transmissions wear out.
To do the B2, you have to do the pistons.
All automatic transmissions wear out. They are a wear item. So that's what I mean, that would be like clutches are a problem. You have to do them every 100,000 miles. No, it's automatic transmissions never last forever. I'm going to get crucified in the comments for section. But
someone's going to be like, I have a turbo hydromatic that is in my
1940 something and it's original
dinosaur. Yeah, it powers my dinosaur with a turbo hydromatic.
Let me put it this way. GM transmissions last forever. Chrysler transmissions don't make it to 60. That's a gross exaggeration. Fords don't make it to 80, and Mercedes don't make it over 100. Without wearing, right? So there was a 722.6 or whatever. One of the transmissions had a rear bearing issue where there was a tiny little oil passage that would get plugged up and they would explode. You put it in gear. That was the 6-speed though. I don't think the 5-speeds ever had that problem. So anyway, robust engines, robust chassis. Steering is a steering box, so they will wear out in time and get loose. But it's a wear item. It's not a,
I will say that the pleasure of these cars is, well, two things. When you drive them, you feel the sensation of mechanical quality, and when you work on them, you feel the sensation of mechanical quality, which is that everything goes back together and clicks into place. It's the opposite of working on like an Italian car where you're like, well, that seems tight enough. Like it feels like it's right about to break, so I'm going to stop turning.
I'm going to have to file
and
this.
Mercedes, everything goes back together really beautifully.
They're from Mercedes golden era where everything was really engineered at no cost.
No regard to cost.
Right. At no cost. Zero. The other thing is the sporty nature. So the 6-cylinder stick shift cars are quite sporty.
Yes.
And by that I mean
huge amounts of body roll.
Huge nautical amounts of body roll. But they don't really understeer all that badly. A little bit what you want, but you can kick them out.
Slide it around. It's a hilarious experience, and nobody expects that from that car, and so it's really uproarious to do that.
It's great to watch. I love watching a really well piloted 129, especially as a 6-cylinder on a back road.
Yes, we have a lot of experience doing that because we have a friend who is insane enough to try to do that, and he does.
And he does. He keeps up with
anything that we're driving.
Yeah.
in the SL, which is great.
And
what
he's
a great way to motor.
in the lap of luxury with ice cold air conditioning and a good stereo. The late cars especially, really good stereos.
The Bose stereo started in 94. But optional seat heaters, even though it was $100,000 in a convertible in 1990.
For some reason, seat heaters just were not de rigueur at that point, and I think we've just come to expect them from everything. Steering wheel heaters are that way now. Like every car should have it.
The cars are cheap. Also, that was the other thing I wanted to sort of make a market commentary. It is criminal to me that an R107 costs more than an R129.
Is it just scarcity? Let me ask you this question. We've talked a lot about scarcity, right? A lot of cars, a lot of them are produced, they're just going to be less expensive. To me, the only 107s that are truly worth a lot of money are the latest cars. Like an early 280 stick shift, fine, but a 560 SL where they have
I would have a 500. A European 500.
So a late European 500 or a US 560, they didn't make that many of them.
Yeah, they did. They're freaking everywhere.
Compared to 129s?
Yeah. I mean, the car was, they made a lot of 107s.
So 107's best year was its last year, which is crazy. It outsold its previous year all the time, which is crazy for a car that was 20 years old at that point. Yeah. But the market was sort of coming online and people were becoming more wealthy. And so that explains
the market was spicy.
But it was also at its best. I think a 560 is the best. 500s and 560, the latest cars are the best.
You want a Euro 500 because the US cars have low compression and the US bumpers and US lights.
Okay, the bumpers and lights. What I loved about the 560 was its torque monster, and it would just ignite the tires off the line. And they weren't that fast. They were 8 seconds to 60, maybe. And the 500s, you need to rev to get power out of. So it's different character, whichever suits yourself. But my thought is there can't be that many 500s and 560s truly desirable 107s. And so even though it had a huge production run with enormous total number of produced, the 560s are expensive because they were the best.
Yeah.
You're right that the 129 is a much better car, vastly better car. I mean, the 107 had swing axle rear suspension, Pendelachse in German, which basically means you're going to flip it and die.
If you get into oversteer, it's going to get exciting.
It gets pretty hairy, and they do snap sideways very, very quickly. And you have the world's largest steering wheel, and your hand will hit both your legs and the dashboard and the windshield. So and you get bloody knuckles just trying to turn. Not a perfect car. But the only engineering problem I find with a 129 is there's not enough room for my foot on the gas pedal. Every time I get into 129, there's two issues. On the driver's side, my size 11 shoe is wedged in between the bottom of the dash and the top of the gas pedal, which I think they fixed for the later cars.
I do not have this problem.
Fuck you. And then the passenger side, I always want the seat to go further back than it does. Every time I get in one, I'm like, God. But structurally, unbelievably sound, not a lot of pile shake, quiet, fast.
It's a very high quality experience, and so I think they're criminally underpriced. It is peak Mercedes. I think they're aesthetically beautiful, but it's nice that there are still some affordable cars out there, and it's obviously not going to appeal to someone who's like looking for an M3 to go terrorize backroads in, and it's not that type of car. It's
not for that.
But I swear by them. I'm a big fan.
R230 was of no interest to me. R231 was interesting because that became an all aluminum construction car, engineered like the Dickens, and really moved the bar for that type of vehicle in terms of engineering. But it was so ugly that no one cared. Now the new one's out. I haven't driven the new one yet.
I'm interested.
But I can't imagine. I don't particularly like the 911-ish shape of the rear end. I don't like that AMG styling language. But I'm sure it's very well engineered, and I love that it's coming as a V8 only. But all-wheel drive, and I just think, come on, you're moving further and further away from like the SL mission, and now it's just, is it an old man sports car or is it an AMG? Like, whatever. I don't get it.
I agree.
But I think
so. It is. I mean, my goal. I don't know. I hope to always at some point have an R129. I will probably the one I have. I will probably sell and buy one in a more interesting color combination with lower miles at some point. But to me, the original reason why I bought this car. Is because I sold my 500e and I wanted basically the same content for less money. And that's the funny thing about it, because this car costs more than an SL, than a 500e new, but they are a small fraction of the price. And so if you want a 500e and you can't afford it, consider an SL 500.
And if you don't want a convertible, put the hardtop on, it's a better car then anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, that is all very true. So, budget 500e, I mean, if people are always feeling discouraged about the market, then that's a place to look if you think you might like a V8 automatic thing, which is
But I think
weird suggestion to make from enthusiasts.
Yeah, but Haggerty UK nailed it. I mean, it's the one sort of non-enthusiast car that enthusiasts really love, right? Yeah. We're driving enthusiasts. We love to go haul ass on back roads, and yet we all kind of want a 129 for that cruise.
And I think that, I mean, I'm waiting for them to go up in price just because it makes sense. Mm-hmm. I don't want them to, although it would be nice when they start becoming valuable enough that people love them, because inevitably you'll be buying one from someone who progressively Craigslisted it down market to someone who didn't know what it was and couldn't afford to keep it or look after it. I mean, because these cars generate big bills, especially if you're having Mercedes dealer do the top cylinders, then you walk away with a bill for $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 to do all that. And so they ended up, doing the same thing that every expensive car does, where they sort of die, or they are with dead people, or nearly dead people, and those are the ones you want to try and find, although they might have some neglected maintenance.
They've done okay in value. They've definitely gone up in the last couple of years.
Yeah, they have. But I still think it represents a really strong value for what it is. You can get a superb early car with 60,000, 70,000 miles for $10,000.
The best example that I can give is the current. Oh, should I tell anyone who it is? So there's a guy who's currently in a very, very large position at a very, very large car magazine and really knows a lot of stuff. And his friend's dad bought a brand new first year 129 and had like 250,000 miles on it or something. And this man has the financial means to have anything he wants. And we found a 20,000 mile identical copy of his car. And he paid an outrageous sum of money for this car, given the market. I think it was like $40,000 or something. He would have paid the same amount of money for that car as he would have for a brand new. If it cost him $200,000, he would have done it because he found the SL that he wanted. And frankly, you could buy a new one for $100 and whatever it is, $1,000, or you can buy an R129. And I'm convinced the 129.
Yeah, if you could buy the best one in the world for $40,000, my God.
Yeah.
Why would you not?
Yeah. And the idea is now he has the two side by side, last I heard. And he will just drive them until the end of his life. And that's
like many SL drivers do, because it is a perfect car for a 90-something-year-old car enthusiast, Carmudgeon.
Case in point.
I may die at any moment, which means we should probably end this episode. In conclusion,
Derek, it's over.
Yes, my life, perhaps.
Bye.